He was the Mohawked Destroyer, the cold-eyed knockout artist who made bloodshed a form of entertainment. Chuck Liddell didn't just compete in the UFC. For a while, he was in the UFC. When the sport was fighting to escape the shadows, it was Chuck who helped drag it into the light. With fists like weapons and nerves of steel, he dominated the light heavyweight division and helped turn MMA into a global phenomenon. But the fighting world is cruel. It takes everything, gives back little, and never looks back. And now, at 55, Chuck Liddell is no longer the man who once ruled the cage. His speech is slow. His movements are stiff. The fire that once burned behind his eyes has dimmed. Fans who once screamed his name now look at him in silence. They remember what he was and quietly mourn what he has become. This is the tragic downfall of Chuck Liddell, a man who gave everything to fighting, and now fights only with the silence that follows. Chuck was born on December 17, 1969, in Santa Barbara, California. His life was never easy. Raised by a single mother, he was the oldest of 4 children. His father vanished early, leaving behind a void filled with instability, anger, and pressure. With no father figure and a home that struggled to stay in order, Chuck became the protector of the family. He didn't grow up with comfort. He grew up with fists and survival instincts. By the time he was 12, Chuck was already training in Koei-kan karate, a brutal, unforgiving martial art that demanded full discipline. And Chuck, who had trouble in school and was often drawn to fights, found his place there. Not because he loved discipline, but because he loved combat. Pain didn't scare him. He leaned into it. In high school, he excelled in both football and wrestling. His name became known not just for his tackles or takedowns, but for the fights he got into after the final whistle. At Cal Poly, he wrestled at the NCAA Division I level and earned a degree in accounting. But the numbers on a spreadsheet couldn't hold his interest. He found more meaning in gyms and late-night street brawls than he ever did in a classroom. After college, Chuck moved into kickboxing. That path led him to John Hackelman's Pit Gym in San Luis Obispo. And that gym would change his life forever. That's where the Iceman was born, a nickname that perfectly matched the man. Chuck didn't show fear. He didn't trash talk. He didn't even smile. He was calm, cold, and brutal. He would stare across the cage like a statue, and once the fight started, he would take apart his opponent with terrifying efficiency. His teammates would later say he wasn't just cold before the fight. He was colder afterward. In 1998, Chuck Liddell entered the UFC. The organization was still finding its way, and there was no glamour, no big checks, no mainstream attention. Fighters stepped into cages with barely any rules, minimal safety, and raw aggression. Chuck didn't just survive in that environment, he thrived. His debut came at UFC 17, where he earned a tough decision win. From there, he fought again and again, each time gaining more fans, more respect, and more momentum. Chuck didn't need a flash. He had fists. His unique striking style was unpredictable. He kept his hands low, his chin high, and dared his opponent to take a shot. Most of them did, and most of them never saw what hit them in return. He knocked people out with punches that seemed to come out of nowhere. His timing was impeccable. He could draw you in, make you feel like you had him figured out, then blast you with a hook that shut the lights off instantly. It was beautiful and brutal. As the UFC grew, it needed a face, someone to carry the organization through the dark years. That face became Chuck Liddell. Between 2001 and 2004, Chuck tore through the division. He destroyed Vitor Belfort, demolished Renato Sobral, and then took on his most heated rival, Tito Ortiz. Their feud became personal, and when Chuck knocked him out in 2004, it wasn't just a win. It was a moment a turning point in UFC history. That fight was one of the most watched events at the time, and Chuck became a superstar overnight. Fans fell in love with the Iceman's walkout, the DMX music, the mohawk, and the destruction he left behind. He wasn't just a fighter, he was a brand. His image became as iconic as his right hand. Chuck's fighting style was dangerous, not just for his opponents, but for himself. He refused to play it safe. He didn't hide behind defense. He charged forward and bet everything on timing and toughness. And for years, that gamble paid off. He became champion. He defended his title with knockout after knockout. He headlined pay-per-views. His face was on merchandise. He appeared on TV shows like Entourage, made cameos on late-night talk shows, and was even featured in national commercials. He was no longer just a fighter.
He was a cultural figure. But while Chuck stood at the top, cracks started forming underneath. Fame brought distractions. He began partying more, training less. He admitted later that he let his discipline slip. He believed he was untouchable. He had always taken punches and kept going. Why would it stop now? In 2007, he faced Rampage Jackson in a long-awaited rematch. And Rampage didn't just beat him, he crushed him. One punch, one moment, and Chuck lay unconscious on the mat. It wasn't just a loss, it was a warning. But Chuck didn't listen. He came back again and again. He lost to Keith Jardine in a strange, flat performance. Then he faced Rashad Evans. The result was chilling. One overhand right, and Chuck dropped instantly. Arms stiff, eyes wide, body motionless. It was like watching a statue fall. Commentators stopped speaking. Dana White looked shaken. Everyone knew something had changed. The Iceman was melting. Fast. Despite the knockouts, Chuck wouldn't stop. He returned in 2009 to fight Mauricio Shogun Hua. For a brief moment, he looked sharp. Then Shogun landed a clean shot, and Chuck crumbled. Another brutal knockout. Dana White finally stepped in. He went public and begged Chuck to retire. Not just with words, but with action. Dana offered him a front office job with the UFC. A real role, a salary, a place in the business side of the sport he helped build. Chuck agreed. He put on a suit, attended UFC events, shook hands, took pictures. But behind the scenes, it was clear he wasn't ready to leave the cage. He still trained. He still hit the pads. Fans still asked, "When are you coming back?" And Chuck listened. Then came rumors. The money wasn't lasting. The mansions, the fast cars, the big lifestyle, it added up. Reports surfaced about failed investments, business losses, and financial pressure. Chuck never confirmed anything, but insiders said it was real. And when Oscar De La Hoya launched Golden Boy MMA in 2018, the comeback began. Golden Boy MMA was new. Oscar De La Hoya wanted to make a splash. And what better way than to announce Chuck Liddell versus Tito Ortiz one more time? But this wasn't 2006, it was 2018. Chuck was 48 years old. He hadn't fought in nearly a decade. His chin was gone, his body is slower, his movements are stiff. Still, he agreed to fight. Maybe it was the money. Maybe it was the roar of the crowd. Or maybe he just couldn't say goodbye. The press conferences were hard to watch. Chuck slurred his words. He seemed confused. His timing in interviews was off. Fans online voiced concern. Tito looked sharp, confident. He didn't even taunt Chuck. He didn't need to. Everyone already knew what was coming. On November 24, 2018, the two stepped into the cage one last time. From the opening bell, it was clear. Chuck wasn't there. His stance was slow. His punches had no speed. He looked like a man trying to remember who he once was. Tito circled, waited, and then landed a clean right hand. Chuck dropped instantly. The crowd didn't cheer. They gasped. No one celebrated. It was too painful to watch. Tito raised his hand in victory, but his face showed no joy.
"I hope he's okay," he said afterward. "I respect him. I always have." Even Dana White, who had refused to be part of the promotion, called the fight a disgrace. Golden Boy MMA never held another event. The promotion disappeared, and Chuck once again was left in the silence. After that final fight, Chuck faded from the MMA scene. No more fight camps, no training partners, no contracts, just memories. He made a few TV appearances, Celebrity Big Brother, some UFC throwback events, a few red carpet photos. But each time fans saw him, they noticed. He looked older. His speech was more slurred, his energy dimmer. It was like watching someone age and fast forward. The cost of years of punishment was now impossible to ignore. His personal life unraveled too. In 2020, he and his wife Heidi Northcott divorced. They had 2 children together. The split was quiet, but significant. His home life, just like his career, was falling apart. He wasn't coaching. He wasn't commentating. His executive role at the UFC had been dissolved years earlier. Dana White still praised him in interviews, but the connection was gone. Chuck wasn't part of the team anymore. Financially, things didn't improve. He tried launching businesses, a cannabis brand, a clothing line, a podcast. None of it lasted. There was no steady income, no movie deals, no endorsements. The sport he helped build had moved on, and Chuck was left behind. His Instagram videos showed him alone, training in empty rooms, shadowboxing by himself, promoting charity events. The loneliness was obvious. Fans noticed. The comments were full of support, but also sadness. Everyone could see what Chuck had become. A warrior without a battlefield. Chuck Liddell will always be a legend in MMA. He helped shape the UFC before it was popular, before ESPN, before Reebok deals. He was the original icon, the man who walked through fire and came out swinging. To longtime fans, Chuck is remembered as the Knockout King, the fighter who crushed Ortiz, who ended Randy Couture, who stared down opponents with dead eyes and left them unconscious. He was more than a man. He was a myth. But to younger fans, he's something else. He's the cautionary tale. The man who didn't know when to quit, who kept fighting long after his body was done, who chased comebacks and ended up chasing ghosts. And that's the pain of his story. He never got a proper farewell. No big ceremony, no final tribute, no packed arena rising to its feet in respect. He wasn't proud. It was silent, forced. First by Dana White, then by repeated knockouts, then by fans who stopped watching. Others walked away clean. Georges St-Pierre retired on top and is seen as a model of professionalism. Daniel Cormier became a respected voice in commentary. Khabib retired undefeated and started a successful gym. But Chuck's story is different. His legacy lives in slow-motion replays and the quiet question, why didn't he stop? He wasn't just a fighter. He was the fighter. And now, in 2025, Chuck lives far from the cage. His name still holds weight, but it's a name attached to sorrow. He tried to come back when the world begged him not to. He believed in his chin when it was already gone. He stayed in the game when the game had moved on. Because for Chuck, fighting wasn't a job. It was his identity. And when that identity was stripped away, he was left with nothing but echoes. Today, Chuck Liddell is 55. He no longer moves with the confidence of a champion. He walks slowly, speaks softly. His interviews are rare. When he appears at UFC events, it's by invitation only. Not as a coach, not as an analyst, just as a memory. He isn't rich. He isn't active. He isn't part of the sport's future. And yet, he is the reason the sport has a future. Without Chuck, there may have never been Conor McGregor, No sold-out arenas, no ESPN deals. He helped carry the UFC when no one else could. And in doing so, he sacrificed himself. That sacrifice wasn't just physical. It was mental, emotional, and personal. He lost time, he lost money, he lost family, and eventually, he lost the cheers. Now, when fans speak his name, it's with sadness. Not because he failed, but because he gave too much. And the sport couldn't give it back. He should have left on his own terms. He should have walked away with his head held high. But he didn't. He kept coming back. Not because he had something to prove, but because he didn't know how to stop. Chuck Liddell will forever stand as a monument in the history of MMA. But that monument is cracked, weathered,